Matthew Grande. I am one of the principals and the head of impact at Shift Capital. We are an impact real estate development firm based in the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia. So just a little bit more about us. So we're a solutions-based impact real estate development group. We take an integrated approach to equitable communities. So I'll go into a little bit more of what that means. But it really means kind of approaching community and impact development holistically. So we work in every asset class, we perform every function ourselves, and that kind of allows us to make sure we are, fully serving communities kind of across their spectrum of needs. We are a certified B Corp. So a couple of years ago, we made the decision not only to certify our operating entities as B Corps, but also our fund. So we have both B Corp certification for operating entities and fund as well. I'm sure being in this class, you hear a lot about kind of patient capital. That is kind of one of the underlines of our work. We feel like that is what is necessary to actually drive kind of long-term meaningful change in communities. I wanted to start kind of just grounded in our theory of change and logic model, because I feel like this gives you kind of a good view of kind of our foundational elements. So the problem that we really zeroed in on, which will not come as a surprise to any of you, is, typically in underdeveloped and developing neighborhoods, residents are displaced when speculative and kind of opportunistic developers come in, right? You can see this in neighborhoods around Philadelphia and neighborhoods around the country where, what has been built in a community doesn't align to what that community's needs were. So we really focused on that problem and focused on kind of developing and redeveloping assets with a focus on that existing community's needs. So the best example that I use with this is, those first two industrial buildings we bought. If we were a traditional for-profit developer, we would have put high-end condos in them because that's kind of highest and best use if you're a real estate developer. What Kensington did not need was high-end, residential housing. What Kensington needed was jobs. So those two buildings, which now are completely finished and about 90% leased up, we developed 100% as workspaces. So those two buildings now house about 80 different small businesses, and they span kind of a spectrum of small individual kind of artists, nonprofits, a ton of makers and kind of small batch manufacturers. So that really kind of demonstrates that emphasis on redeveloping assets in a community in alignment to that community's needs. So our theory of change was, we could increase the long-term self-sufficiency, safety, prosperity, and quality of life for residents in these communities through that holistic, thoughtful real estate development, and like I said, associated services, and partnership and programs, which I'll also kind of touch on, with city, community, and even kind of larger industry leaders. I'm just going to spend a minute on the logic model. I mean, like a lot of our organizations, right? We need patient capital. We need, skilled, very mission-driven staff, and we need a broad suite of value-aligned partners. Our scope of activities includes every real estate type. So we do industrial, we do commercial, we do mixed use, we do residential, we do vacant land. And then on the services side, we do everything from community engagement to acquisition and disposition, construction and development, leasing and property managing, and financing and fundraising. And then, as I mentioned, we do a lot of partnership. Outputs are the things that we can directly control and measure. We focus obviously on dollars invested, square feet we've renovated, broader infrastructure and public projects, resident engagement. So it's important to us that we're not only giving a residential tenant a home, but we're also giving them, value add services that go with that home. And again, partnerships and programs, which I'll get into. Bigger picture, we're really, focused on affordable housing, economic and employment opportunities. Like I said, increased kind of value add services, not only for residential tenants, but for commercial tenants as well. Reducing blight and vacancy, and, and reducing crime and traffic as well. So these are our 6 major impact themes. I've touched on all of these a little bit. Housing, economic development, community, health and safety, arts and culture, and inclusion and diversity. As you will see, we use those 6 impact themes, but we align them to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I think, for us, we're serving such a broad group of stakeholders, investors, lenders, community members, and a lot of people use different kind of structures or standards to measure that. We feel like, a high level digestible impact set of themes is important, and then something a little bit deeper like the Sustainable Development Goals allows us to kind of serve that broader audience. So I touched on this a little bit already. So we operate a fund, which kind of controls the real estate assets, and then, Shift Operations manages all of these functions. A couple of the neighborhoods we're working in right now are North Kensington, and Broad and Erie, or Hunting Park, and East Tioga. So I touched on this a little bit already. We invest kind of across a spectrum of real estate, which early on did not appeal to a lot of funders and investors. They were so used to saying, I only invest in industrial, I only invest in affordable housing. They hadn't seen this, go, hyper-focused geographically and actually buy across asset classes, so you can kind of serve, the community across the spectrum. Brian, our founder, always uses the example of, if you look at the low-income housing tax credit world, they usually build a large affordable housing project, but then they don't do anything around it, right? So they've built something that is a value add, but because they haven't built up commerce around it, because they haven't created more job opportunities, they've put kind of all the pressure on this single development to help change a community, and it's usually not sufficient. So I'm just going to touch briefly on partnerships and programming. I mean, as a for-profit, social enterprise, we can do a lot via our projects, but the reality is, we need to rely on local nonprofit partners to do what they do best and do things that we can't do. So I'm going to start Impact Services, who's the Community Development Corporation in Kensington. They led a Heart of Kensington neighborhood planning exercise a couple years back. And this is where I tell people, this was the greatest opportunity for any neighborhood to have a strong leading CDC, but also have, in this case, a couple of dozen supporting nonprofits as well as private developers. So we were able to contribute to that plan in a meaningful way, given that we had already purchased assets that were in some of the key areas of focus in that plan. So we still think that that's kind of one of the best opportunities where, we don't even have to have as much input into the process. We can just provide the capacity building for the community to kind of identify and develop real estate projects. The other one that I'm going to touch on, which I think is super important and one of the best models that we have seen for equitable development, is the Jumpstart program. It was started in Germantown by a for-profit developer, Ken Weinstein. And it started because people in the neighborhood were asking Ken, how do I be a developer? How do I do what you do? And this started with a couple of people around a conference table in his office. And he would he would give them advice, he would mentor them. And then he got to the point where he actually started lending them money to do, acquisition and construction and development of projects. on a short-term basis, like 9 to 18 months. So fast forward to today, Ken's program has trained over 1,000 people. They've completed about $15 million in projects since like 2015. And we've expanded it to Kensington in partnership with Impact Services, but it's also expanded to about 8 other neighborhoods around the city. The brilliant thing about this program is it's 10 hours of classroom training around real estate. It's assignment to a seasoned real estate professional as a mentor, and it includes the financing piece. So you've like immediately removed typical barriers to knowledge and capital that residents in these communities have. So that to me is an example of a program that like, there's very few neighborhoods around the country where you couldn't kind of drop that in and make a real meaningful impact. So now I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about this idea of scaling. As I shared with you, we started kind of very modestly, with 2 industrial buildings, kind of a shell of a team, and we've scaled kind of considerably. This is something from my old consulting days that when asked to kind of make this presentation, I was like, this is a great way to view growth, regardless of your business. So starting in that upper left-hand corner, sometimes the easiest way to grow is to just sell, more of your existing products to your existing markets, right? So this is, the idea of market penetration, where just, do more of what you do for the same, kind of customer group or market that you're serving. Once you've kind of reached that point of market penetration, then you have a couple of different directions you can go. You can expand into a new market with your existing product. So that's that kind of market development strategy component, where you're saying, I have this great tool that I think is value add, but I've only been selling it to this one market. I think there's another market that could also benefit from it. So that really puts kind of the effort of business development on you, but it doesn't require you to then go out and develop some new product or service. In the upper right-hand quadrant, the project development strategy, that's where you say, all right, I have this captive audience in my existing market. What are they telling me they need that I'm not offering them already? So what new products or services can I sell to my existing market, which, kind of conversely to the market development strategy, the product development strategy is really that focus on product and doesn't require me to kind of do the sales or business development of going into a new market. And then finally, and kind of the biggest lift, this idea of diversification is actually creating a new product for a completely new market, which, that is a heavy lift because you're building something new and you're trying to sell it to a new audience. So that's why typically you will see people encourage you towards product development strategy or market development strategy as a kind of shorter term, tactical growth approach, and the diversification strategy being a, kind of a longer term, higher cost, slower adoption strategy. So what did this mean for us? So like I mentioned, kind of the first way we expanded was by asset class and development type. So we started with industrial, but after a pretty short period of time, we actually started buying small, like commercial and mixed use properties on Kensington Avenue. And then a short time after that, we started buying residential properties. And a short time after that, we started buying vacant land. So now, we have a portfolio that includes, on one end of the spectrum, an 850,000 square foot industrial building on 19 acres. and on the smallest end of the spectrum, a 400 square foot vacant lot, and like literally everything in between. Again, that aligned to our strategy because what we felt we needed to do in these communities was be holistic from a real estate perspective. The second kind of product development strategy was really around function. It was important to us to kind of weave impact through the entire real estate development lifecycle, right? Like we could have just acquired and let somebody else do the development, let somebody else do the construction, let somebody else do the property management. And there's plenty of people that do that. For us, it was important to actually do all of those functions. So we understood what doing those functions thoughtfully meant before we decided to kind of partner or use someone else. So this is a perfect example of, I see like the divide in traditional real estate and impact real estate. A traditional developer, right? They may acquire in a neighborhood that has a ton of opportunity, but then they may, like I used in my early example, like they may develop a high-end residential condo that doesn't serve that current community. So this was why we said we need to do all the functions to see kind of what's important and how we can be intentional. So I talked about development, construction. We try to use kind of as much local and underrepresented construction firms that we can. We try to lease to, very value aligned partners. We want our tenants to kind of share our values because we think that's important to the strength of the community. Property management, we want to make sure like we are very attentive to all of our tenants, residential and commercial, and we provide them with value add services, on top of kind of traditional property management. So that was our kind of product development focus. The market development focus, which has started to happen a little bit, I would say more aggressively in recent years is, we started in 2 neighborhoods in Philadelphia. We've now expanded to a 3rd neighborhood in Philadelphia, the Sharswood neighborhood, where we're JVing with Mosaic Development, which is another kind of local developer. But we are also now kind of looking to serve markets around the country. So right now, I am working with folks in Alabama. My partners are working with folks in DC, West Virginia. So we're finding opportunities, Los Angeles, we're finding opportunities kind of around the country where we can take these tools we've developed here in Philadelphia and share them in other markets. And then we're also expanding kind of by customer. We built all these functions originally just to serve our own projects. So all of those functions I've described, we literally just did for shift projects. Whereas now we do those functions or some of those functions in a third-party capacity. So we do third-party development. So we're working, we've kind of sent proposals in response to RFPs for third-party development. We're also pursuing other kind of joint ventures for development. We are doing third-party construction services now. We've built our own GC. And even my work around kind of impact measurement and programming, I'm offering that kind of as a third-party service to developers and community development corps, and even funders around the country. So that's a little bit kind of how we've scaled from a business perspective. And then, I also wanted to kind of touch on scaling impact because I think that's important. Obviously all of the ways that we've scaled, that I've just talked about, are with an end goal of not only, expanding Shift financially, but also with a focus on impact. But what we've realized over the years is, impact leverage really comes from your stakeholder groups, right? Because you can, I always start with the team, right? We make decisions about our team and we try to find how we can provide the highest amount of impact for our team members, right? So that's everything from, you know, diversity and inclusivity practices, offering better benefits, offering higher wages, offering better training, right? So scaling impact internally to say, how are we kind of providing as much value for our team? And then kind of the next, most important group for us is our tenants. Like I always tell people, like there has never been a successful real estate project that didn't have tenants. So like we are not successful unless they are successful. So this is the next area where, yes, we can give a small business a workspace, and yes, we can give a residential tenant a house, but like we can scale impact up for those folks by bringing in services, by partnering with people that can help residents, that can help small businesses. So some great examples just from the last year, we partnered with Comcast to deliver free internet to all of our kind of qualified lower and moderate income tenants. We've partnered with a group called Health Plus to deliver free telehealth to all of our residential tenants. So those are perfect examples of like, we are kind of partnering to scale impact for that tenant group. Investors and lenders, believe it or not, like this was something that, early days we were, anybody we could kind of get a meeting with or get a dollar from, we were interested in talking to. But now, what we've realized is who you take money from also determines kind of not only the impact you have, but kind of the ripple effects of that impact. So taking money from a community development finance institution versus kind of a large, non-community bank, right? Like those are very different relationships. And we have both. I mean, we have early day lenders that have not been the kindest through all of this, especially, but we also have local lenders who, as soon as we called and asked for a deferment, gave them to us. So, this is an area, whether you're seeking investment or seeking, debt, I think you can actually expand your impact by working with banks and investors who are value aligned. I've talked about partners. Again, this is our biggest, one of our biggest kind of areas of leverage. We want to offer workforce development. We can't do it ourselves, so we partner for it. So we think that's, again, just a great opportunity to expand impact. Vendors is another like lost opportunity. When you look at how much we spend on contractors and professional services, that is another like tremendous opportunity for you to scale impact, right? You can work with underrepresented firms. You can make sure those firms are paying their employees fairly, making sure those firms are offering proper benefits, before you sign them up. So we work on things like, preferred supplier clauses, and, you can put things in place like that again give you an opportunity to kind of further scale your impact just, by the dollars you spend. And same thing on the, on the community side. We have a team of 30 plus people right now, and yes, there's the work they do for us, but that's also a lot of volunteer capacity, right? So, we can support nonprofits, we can support local community groups with our time, with our additional resources, through donations, right? So like, it's just another opportunity to take resources that we already kind of have in abundance and use them to scale our impact in the community. And then finally, right, the earth, like what can we do? What decisions can we make that have a lasting, impact on the world? And this, very self-admittedly, this is one of the areas where I think, we have the most work to do. Folks on the super mature end of the spectrum, they are using all sustainably sourced lumber and building materials. And like, I would love for us to do that, it is very hard for us to do that given kind of the neighborhoods we're working in, the financing we have, but it's aspirational for us. We are talking to sustainable materials providers and such to see if we can't find kind of better opportunities to expand our impact and kind of how we affect the earth as well. Thank you. Thanks everybody for your time today.